Hello, today is Wednesday, May 8th, 2019. This is the standard kubeadm office hours. And I do believe we have a fairly large agenda this week because we did a lot of backlog grooming. So why don't I share my screen and we can just start going through it. All right, hopefully folks can see my screen. As always, if you don't have your details logged up here, please do so. First up, Fabrizio, kubeadm HA tests.
So this is kubeadm admin upgrade test. Sorry, it is an error. So new upgrade tests are up, and we are in the process of deprecating or removing Kubernetes anywhere. While cleaning up, I noticed that the run frequencies of our job are not harmonized. So I'm proposing to have all the job in running on master every 2 hours and all the other every 12 hours. So 2 times a day, if it is fine for everyone.
Every 2 hours is a lot. Is this just the upgrade jobs for every 2 hours?
No, currently we have 3 sets of jobs. One is the standard job, so kind that spin ups 111 cluster or 112 or cluster on master. The other is the upgrade jobs, and then we have the X on Y jobs.
Yeah, but which one do you want to promote to every 2 hour, I guess is the question.
Only the 3 jobs, only the one running on masters. Otherwise, I can do every 4 hours.
I think 4 is sufficient. 2 is a lot. I eventually wanted to get kind kubeadm jobs to be PR blocking. I don't know if we can get that into this cycle or not. Just like, so every PR is gated on that master run. The other key branches, every 4 hours is fine.
For the other branches, I'm proposing every 12 hours.
It's fine.
Okay, so every 4. Okay. Second, I'm going to harmonize the notification, having all the jobs sending a notification to the C-cluster lifecycle mailing list after failing for 24 hours.
It seems fair. What's the current setting?
Oh, it is scattered. I have documented it on an issue, but this is more or less the average.
Okay, that's fine.
We don't have upgrade notifications at the moment.
Yes, now not all the jobs have notification. I want to add to all the jobs. And last is we are starting to have a fair amount of jobs related to kubeadm, and I think that we should have them grouped in a dashboard. Named kubeadm, named C cluster lifecycle kubeadm. Now they are only on C cluster lifecycle all.
You want to create a separate bin or bucket, is what you're saying?
A separate, if I can share, I will show you.
Sure, I'll stop sharing.
So, sharing desktop share. So now, if you go into to the test green, for C cluster lifecycle, we have all and then some sub dashboard. But the kubeadm tests are only under all So you have to search for them.
If you want to add a subcategory, that's fine.
Okay.
I'm going to have to update my queries now, but that's okay.
No, for me it will be useful, but if it is annoying, no problem.
I don't. I think it will be useful just to separate the signal. I think there's other things cluster API provide. Yeah, because they're going to have all the kappa or all the CAPI things underneath cluster lifecycle.
Yeah.
And as we get more and more things underneath that umbrella, we should probably separate out kubeadm.
Okay. So if you want to continue, and I give a quick overview of how to debug the new kinder test jobs. I think that it will be useful to everyone. So basically, there are a few points to keep in mind. The first one is that each job run a sequence of tasks, where a task is a command with args. They are defined in kubeadm repo, and this is an example. They are really simple. For instance, this is the task list for the upgrade job. The first job is to pull a base image. Then we start adding the Kubernetes versions of this image. So each task is really a command: kinder build, kinder create cluster, or kinder doing it. So and this is the and using this we can basically test whatever workflow we want. And while if you go looking at the job run, basically what you have is that you have the usual log where everything is logged, but if we look at artifacts, under artifacts we have a separate log for each step. So if you want to check how it went, you don't have to search into the log, but you can look at single step more easily. And then you have all the end-to-end test jobs and all the logs from the cluster. And the last point that is important to know that it is now really easy to reproduce locally the test, because basically what you have to do is to do local on your machine kinder test workflow, and you call the same workflow file that it is used by Pro, so by the end-to-end. You can even, if you want to run the entire job locally, you do it this way. If you want to run step by step, so one task at a time or one command at a time, you have to simply do, you try run locally, and it prints all the command that are executed, and you can run step by step. That's it.
Good job, Fabrizio. That's good work.
I'm gonna ask that you document this in the kubeadm repo, because that's as people shift and shuffle around, that'd be highly usul for them to diagnose if they have.
Yes, I already started to document something. For instance, I'm documenting which job we have, which version we are testing, and which type of task. So what is the difference between the upgrade test and the X on Y test? So I'm documenting everything while we go ahead. So,
yeah. So I'm definitely going to give you a shout out Fabrizio on the public channels, because anyone who's ever tried to debug Kubernetes anywhere before, that has been a wonderland of complexity. This is far better than what we were doing before.
Thank you. Lubomir did most of the job of Pro, so it is a team job as usual.
Good job. Thanks, you too. All right. Next up, Lubomir, cry-cuddle testing.
I kind of forgot what this is about. Let me quickly check. Before we were testing, in Kubernetes where we are testing Docker as the container runtime provisioner. But now Kind, because we're using Kind as a backend in our tests, Kind has moved to containerd, which means that basically this is a request to cause this issue that Czech created. Because we now already have cry-cuddle. I mean, not yet, but pretty soon, once we update to the latest Kind, we can close this issue. So this is like more when we did the backlog triage, we added this agenda item, but I just wanted to give the heads up that we can close this pretty soon. But now the question is how, what we are not testing Docker shim anymore. And this is in the hands of Signode.
Should we verify coverage or just kind of punt for the time being? So long as we have the CI signal percolating up through the test automation.
I mean, it's a question whether, are you saying that we should hold this issue open as long as
I'm saying, should we? I'm asking you. Do you feel like we should should we leave this open, verifying the other signals from the other groups? But there's like a little bit of concern here. If we're using Kind for everything on the back end now, we're no longer have CI signal coverage for Docker from kubeadm's perspective. We're using containerd. Is that correct?
Yes, this can happen because Kind is hard switching to containerd. There's no unless we start building our own base image, but it's like, Fabrizio, what do you think about this?
I think that we should stick on Kind as much as possible. Otherwise, we are reinventing the wheel.
My only concern is that Docker has been known to break across versions, and especially with our SKU goo that we have is also a little brittle inside of the kubeadm itself. So if we don't have that CI blocking signal as part of a release, and it could just be very rudimentary tests. Most of the time, they're pretty simple. But without that, we have a big gap, and most of our install base, as we know, is still Docker.
Tim, I almost think that this is worth, I know Lubomir and Fabrizio already attend the Kind calls. I show up occasionally. I almost feel like this is worth filing an issue or staffing to produce Kind that can support. You said they hard switched, Lubomir. I know Ben was talking about it, but I know I didn't know they'd done that, but I kind of feel like if Kind is going to be this baseline test layer, which it really wants to be, and I think it's good at doing that, it should support multiple CRIs. And I feel like maybe we're trying to work around that problem instead of trying to staff that so that it could,
So I think there's two problems. One, close the issue. I agree. That makes sense. But two, it brings up a different problem, which is that we're missing CI signal now for Docker-based CRI in our tests.
Then again, the CRI specific tests are owned by Signode.
I know, but there's goo inside of kubeadm that always gets revved every time Docker updates, right? We always eat it. just because of the versionitis and the supported versions, because Docker's been known to break over time, and we've eaten it. So we always had that code in there for us to make sure that we had valid versions that we know we had CI signal for. And because we embedded those specific versions as part of the deployment with Kubernetes Anywhere, for better or for worse, it gave us that signal as part of the release. But now we lose that signal with Kind. And I kind of think we should force Kind to have a multiple CRI interface.
I can ask Ben, but we spoke about this before, and the general response is that I don't think he wants to maintain both of them, which leaves us in a blank spot of having us to maintain both CRIs in a fork, which is not great.
Kind is from what I can see, is specializing as a tool that should be fast and really focus on CI, but not CI for Kubernetes itself, for CI for application on top of Kubernetes.
That's a really good point.
And let's leave a whole area that Kinder is covering, which is the cluster setup. And now if we are talking about to extend this also to the image preparation. So it is tricky having this in Kinder and maintaining also the build of node images. We can do it, but it is.
And also, what about cryo? Should we maybe in the future more cryo users are going to start using kubeadm?
So here's a simple workaround. If we, instead of using Kind for all the base setup is fine, but we could have a very simple job that only just installs Docker, a single node init, which does conformance. Like it's a single node run. We don't have to have multi-node run, but it just verifies that Docker didn't break. That is it.
Yeah, but conformance requires a cluster with 2 worker nodes. So we either
well, we can specify. You can specify the regex to get around this, and I believe there's an option too that exists. And if we don't, we should plummet to get around this, because there's no reason why you can't invoke the end-to-end test apparatus to get around this particular problem.
I don't know. I was under the impression that a cluster without workers cannot pass conformance, and that was after the discussion.
Well, it was in part because of, yes, that's the stricter rule, but we can bypass this particular. There's enough knobs to bypass this to get the CI signal. Basically, we just want to prevent the issue of lacking Docker support, which I think that's fundamental, right? Like a vast majority from the feedback we have of people running kubeadm are still running with Docker. And if we lose that signal, we'll lose a release out in the wild where people, something's going to happen because Docker always breaks. And then we'll release something and they have to immediately patch it.
Yeah. Just to that point, Docker is still the default, right? Am I out of date on that? Like, if you don't change anything, it's
Docker shim is even the default in GKE.
Yeah, so like that, it's important that we keep the signal on that. I did have a question with that I tacked on the end that we could postpone, but I'm curious if we do have plans to make Docker not the default.
I wouldn't mind switching containerd to the default, but I do think I think we should do what the users ask, right? And because they drive our success, and most of the users still use Docker. So I think
no plans at the moment.
Yeah. Cool. We have the option, we have the separate pages for multiple CRIs, and a user can always choose CRI versus, cryo versus containerd versus Docker, and that still exists.
What I can do is that Now, sooner or later, I have to upgrade the version of kind inside Kinder. And while I do this, I will get containerd. I will try to keep both Docker and containerd and see if it is feasible or not.
It requires building a separate base image, which is, pretty big.
Yeah, I have to investigate it, but let's see if it is feasible with Kinder with too much effort. The impression is that it is not simple, but let's see in practice.
You'll need different mounts as well, but I don't see any issue with having containerd mounts and Docker mounts in volumes at the same time. So that could be pretty easy to maintain. It doesn't even have to be an option. You can just have both be supported.
It could be. I have to figure out the detail because currently Kinder basically asks to kind to create the cluster.
Exactly. Yeah. So it would need
if we are giving to kind an image that has Docker instead of the containerd, I don't know what will be the behavior.
Yeah, the kubeadm config will need to change, and then the mounts that kind specifies on the Docker containers to the Docker API are going to need to be bigger. There's going to need to be more mounts to support varlib Docker containers and stuff like that.
Let's see. I'm not sure it is feasible. Let's see if it works without too much.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, why don't we put this as a follow-up item for next week, and we can keep on going. But I do think that it's pretty important. Bootstrap tokens. Oh gosh. Next one.
So the bootstrap token business, I don't think is that complicated. Maybe somebody has to clarify to me. Basically, Dixio sent a PR recently that moves a lot of bootstrap token logic away from different parts of Kubernetes to the cluster. What was the name of the cluster bootstrap repo? So basically, the only bits that I see are left in kubeadm are those that are part of the APIs. We have some, bootstrap utilities under v1 beta 1, v1 beta 2. Like the question is, should we start moving the one for v1 beta 2? Actually, we have to move everything if we make this change.
Yes. So the TLDR for the ask from API Machinery eons ago was to create a separate staging repo for Bootstrap tokens and their utilities because they didn't want it in client Go, even though I kind of disagree with that idea. But that would mean forklifting everything out of v1 beta 1 and referencing it externally.
So the question is, can we proceed with this PR that is going to move our stuff from the APIs?
Let me take a look.
But there is already a PR outside?
No, there is another PR that moves other utilities. The only bits that are left are those in the, our APIs.
In my opinion, this is a stretch of the work that Ross is leading on API. There are other priorities. If we can do also this, good. Otherwise, next version.
I think it's going to be entirely predicated on the API Machinery folks being able to pull the trigger on it. Dixdo is doing this work from China, so I'll follow up on this issue. Why don't you tag me for follow up and I'll assign myself here.
I'm actually not quite sure whether this can be done for v1 beta 1. So it might actually break someone who is vendoring kubeadm.
Absolutely, but if we don't move it, actually we can move only the newer version because the old are hard coded in the old API. correct?
Yeah, for beta 2, it's okay to do so.
And I just checked basically the utilities in there, all only vendor cluster bootstrap, nothing else. So I think it's a clean move at this point, unless somebody has anything else.
No, I think the hardest part is just creating the separate repository for vendoring.
Well, it already exists. That's the cluster bootstrap repo.
Oh, I didn't even know it existed yet.
Yeah, it exists.
So if they have the auto-publishing from the staging repository, then we should be good.
Yes, they're publishing it.
All right, I'll take a look and review it and talk with Lucas and D and figure out where they're at.
Okay.
Next up, Andrew and Ed, machine structured output, machine readable output.
Yes, I started calling it structured output because that's really kind of what we're describing, whether it's for machines or somebody else, I don't care. Yeah, so I just wanted to thank Ed for doing so much work on this and being upfront, super professional about when I kind of showed up and said, hey, I'm thinking about submitting a design doc on this. I know you've done a lot of work. You don't care, do you? And no, he was great. We had a long chat yesterday and thought about a lot of different things together. So this kept definitely a joint effort, and just wanted to give Ed, huge thanks. So the purpose of this CAP, is it on the screen? Let me share it here. The purpose of this CAP is to basically deal with the fact that right now there is no way to have a deterministic means of reading kubeadm output. And I can give you a really, really easy example of it. In 1.12, the kubeadm join command that appears at the end of kubeadm init was not prefixed with any white space. In kubeadm 113, it was prefixed with 2 space characters. In 114, those space characters were gone. So this is how I encountered this issue. And I understand that kubeadm token list allows you to print the join, or create allows you to print the join command, but that creates a new token. So anyway, there are all sorts of other reasons why this is needed. We have software such as Terraform, Ansible, whatever, that might need to parse it. Cluster Lifecycles upgrade tool is going to want to be able to parse this output in a deterministic fashion. So the stated goals, I tried to be vague at first, but I did get a little bit more prescriptive, but I did include not necessarily limited to. Basically, it says that kubeadm should support JSON, YAML, Go template, and text, which is, I'm defining text as the current behavior. You'll notice that it's divided into buffered and unbuffered. That doesn't necessarily mean what you think. I'm not going to get into the whole details here, but there's a link. Essentially, buffered could mean, it doesn't necessarily mean all of the commands output at once. kubeadm token list, for example, buffered may just mean, unbuffered may just mean a token at a time. It doesn't mean a byte at a time. But if a command emits multiple objects, it may just mean an object at a time, even when it's unbuffered. These are some of the commands that would benefit from structured output, but again, it's not an exhaustive list. So this is where it gets interesting, and I really struggled with how to structure this. Lubomir was of great help, so was Ed. So basically the non-goals, and this is one difference from Ed's original design doc. we're not proposing a short variant for text output. If a command wishes to implement that as a flag, they can simply do so by using a default Go template they use for short output. And right now, the only command that currently implements that is version anyway. All 3 of these things are the same, but I listed them separately because I was getting some feedback. I don't think it indicated, I don't think people realized these were the same. Or they all link to the same cause. A non-goal. We're not trying to achieve parity with kubectls output flag. Right now, we're really only focused on JSON, YAML, Go template, and text. We're not trying to prescribe versioned output, although I'm kind of in favor of it, but it would add a lot of technical debt and increase the scope. And most importantly, because somebody asked about this already, they said, oh, why aren't you using the printers from the CLI runtime package? This actually wasn't called out as a non-goal until about 20 minutes ago, until somebody was proofing the design and said, my immediate thought was, why didn't you use the printers from the CLI runtime package? But I eventually realized why you didn't, but I had to keep reading. So I put that here. This all goes down to this. The CLI runtime package is what provides kubectl with its various output formats. But every printer in that package expects a runtime.object, which whatever is emitted by kubeadm currently is not. They're not runtime objects. Sometimes they're just text, but they're not runtime objects, not all of them. And so to introduce runtime objects as the basis for kubeadm output raises the question, do we want versioned output? I actually kind of think that the entire basis of this KEP, the fact that we want structured deterministic output, indicates that versioned output would be a good idea. But I put that the both Ed and I agreed that this might not fit within the scope of this KEP, but be a second KEP once this is in place. And to not scope it or to put it as a non-goal should not indicate a judgment on versioned output, but just we acknowledge that that design requires a much broader discussion. But I think Ross already made a comment and basically translated to versioned output. Yeah, but we don't do it today. And I don't know how that would necessarily, well, that's a much broader discussion. So the user stories I just kind of get into there are some examples, and these wouldn't be scripts necessarily. It's just a way to outline how the output would be used in a friendly fashion. And they're predicated on the existence of some additional data that I list up here. Basically like a friendly bootstrap token. I know there's already a token, but this is just to understand what fields would be available to a Go template. And then here are some functions that we would add to those templates. Node 0 would give you the address and port if you want to do a kubeadm join. Cert is the hash, and join is just like go list. It gives you a join command. Real quick, so the actual design details. Let me go with this user story real fast. You can see the difference between listing token IDs versus listing them as they're discovered. They both use Go templates, but by adding this stream flag, basically it tells the command to just send the tokens to the printer every time they discover one, versus sending a list of tokens and then allowing the template to iterate over it. So the design, it's very much similar to what CLI runtime does, or what, I literally just got done implementing something like this in another project, Skate. So a little simpler than CLI runtime, but not as expansive in its support of different printers. So I kind of met in the middle here. Basically, whether it's an interface or a single exported function for the package, or the signature of a printer should basically be something like this. Accept a writer, a format, and this is not like sprintf, but rather JSON, YAML, text, Go template, and data, which is an interface. I know how people feel about interfaces, but for the purpose of the initial design, it works. So this is just a very pseudo-codish implementation. Essentially, if the interface is a reader, an io.reader, then we assume that they're streaming the output. And so that, like, it's just text, default behavior today, right? You give me a reader, I'm just going to copy from the reader to the writer. Otherwise, we look at the output to decide what to do with it, whether it's JSON, YAML, or text. And if it's none of those, it treats the format, we look at the format to decide what to do with the data. If the format is JSON, we encode it as JSON, YAML as YAML, text, we just print it. And otherwise, we treat it as a Go template, and we execute the template against the writer. So how will the commands actually do the printing? There are a couple of possibilities. They could either receive a printer object, they could send the results to some exported function, they could instantiate a printer directly. This is one that I tried outlining more specifically, but it got way too prescriptive, and I didn't want people to make observations based on what was essentially just pseudocode. But essentially, a command could either receive or return a channel on which a result is placed. And that result could be an IO reader, or that same channel could be used to block until the actual buffered result is received. So obviously that differs based on how the printers are implemented. So the KEP just includes a link of related works, and Ed, we're going to sort of let this KEP stand in for his original design doc. Buffered versus unbuffered, we kind of went over that. And this is that subject where I think we already covered, but the parity with kubectls output flag. And these are just some example outputs. So for example, if you did init-o JSON, you would see enough information that would allow you to construct kubeadm join commands. And raw, for commands that do have a lot of data, so whether it's JSON or YAML or even a Go template, we would allow them to include the actual raw data if that was useful for them. So risks of mitigation, I put 2. Thank you, Ross, for indicating about the tab writer. I just added as a note or design, and it should have been a risk. So not including support for versioned output could possibly result in an applied judgment of said versioned output, but that's not the reason. So in the alpha to beta graduation criteria, it lists that a thorough discussion about whether versioned output should be scoped is required. The second risk that we noted was it might appear that this KEP breaks compatibility with existing output, such as token list, which is a tabular output, but that's not the case because you could just wrap your writer in a tab writer and then use a Go template to print things in columns, so the tab writer will know what to do with it. So test plan is nothing fancy, just match actual output against expected output, and then an automated pipeline that connects kubeadm init to a kubeadm join through parsing that output and constructing the join command. Alpha to beta is pretty much what you would expect. Topic of version outputs. These commands should implement structured output. And this is just kind of standard stuff. GA, and again, very standard stuff. And so this is my first KEP. So this is all a learning experience for me. I'm sure there are 24 things that I missed here or did wrong, but I'm happy to have feedback and make updates as needed.
I like this a lot. I appreciate all the thought that went into this. One question I have for the peanut gallery, which is everybody, is that if you scroll up to the top, you're basically putting argument modifiers for the output, and I don't know if there's I don't know if there's precedent for how we graduate argument modifiers. Whether or not we usually in the past we did minus experimental, which sucks, but I don't know if that's if there's any other way that we do that for graduation.
So real quick, the reason this is a KEP at all, first KEP, I don't know if I still have the KEP rules up here somewhere, but the last point of a KEP was if it impacts the user experience or they will come to rely on it. So I felt like this is something on which they'll come to rely. I don't know in a broad sense about argument modifiers. I feel like -O may be a little grandfathered. It's kind of common for people using kubectl, but it certainly shouldn't circumvent any process. But I do think it's a kind of a known flag.
I think we should definitely reserve -O for exactly this. However, the experimental -O is an interesting topic. Tim, do you think that we can go without the experimental part directly?
Technically, probably not, because, well, I want to talk with people before we did that. I don't think that falls underneath the category of the ability to have an exception, because the people would rely on it immediately. So if we wanted to make breaking changes, we couldn't reserve that right. And what I want to make sure we do.
Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, what I want to make sure we do is that, like, first iteration, we will probably make breaking changes in the future before we want people to rely on it.
I was going to suggest that stream should definitely be under experimental, but if you do that, then it absolutely means that O should be as well. Although I don't believe that what Lubomir said and what you said, Tim, are mutually exclusive. I think that O can be experimental because a command has implemented it, but I still think it should also be reserved. I don't think any, core Kubernetes CLI should implement O as something other than output at this point.
But what was it a graduation criteria to use the runtime objects?
So yeah, it was basically, and I didn't know how the KEP should work for this. This is where I struggled. I feel like there is the KEP doesn't really seem to want you to say, here's a phase 1, here's a phase 2. I think it's more like if you have a phase 2, that would be a separate KEP later. But I basically wanted to say that if this KEP should be adjusted to say that we're going to version output from the very beginning, then I need to adjust the KEP. So maybe it should even been before this is implementable. That discussion needs, and that wasn't a graduation criteria. I guess that's more of a accepted as implementable criteria. But the topic of versioned output should be discussed thoroughly. And like I said, I think I'm in favor of it. I think there's a unique situation. I don't necessarily think that types defined in this package or these packages will be then consumed programmatically. What's more likely is that they'll just be used for scripting or from other non-Go languages. So I think having the versions in the output would be good. I don't necessarily know that it will be necessary to unmarshal these objects unmarshal the data back into the types.
I think it would be used immediately that way inside a copy.
Oh yeah, and what's copy?
Or cluster API stuff.
Okay. Yeah, but I don't. Yeah, but that would just be programmatically. They wouldn't be shelling kubectl though. I guess it's the same problem though, same issue. You're right.
Yeah, they'd get output from the commands as part of the execution for like Cloud Init, right?
Yes. Yeah, I guess you're right. You think they would parse it like that. So in that case, I do think that version output does make sense. And it begs the question but I think that adds a lot of, upfront design debt.
Oh, a lot of boilerplate as well. We basically have to provide the schema that holds all these outputs, and we have to expose it as part of the kubeadm API.
Yeah, although, I mean, honestly, Lubomir, isn't that what we're talking about doing anyway for this to be useful? Whether it has an API version or kind, people still want this to be deterministic. The one thing that I would say about that is, as long as we're not making redactive or changes or renaming things, then not having the schema, as long as it's always forwards compatible, works. But I don't necessarily know we can know that for sure in advance.
There's also the problem like, okay, we have now the kubeadm API currently is v1 beta 2. If we decide to add these new types, we have to start with v1 alpha 1. And we are basically creating a
new schema, CLI, like kubeadm CLI schema.
You can graduate things initially straight into beta. People do that all the time. So it doesn't need to go through alpha stage so long as you vetted it properly.
It's kind of, we have a feature that is alpha, but the API is beta.
Well, I wouldn't promote it I wouldn't promote the types for external parsing from alpha to beta. I would make sure we get all the jiggery in place and then promote the types to like a v1 beta 3.
It kind of feels like people are in favor of version types out the gate.
Yeah, just I'm not in favor of the boilerplates, that's all.
I've done that pretty recently, so it's, in my mind, I could probably, at least with the boilerplate into place in a day or two. I mean, that doesn't remove the amount of work that has to be done to make sure the design is correct. But if you're just concerned about somebody doing that grunt work, I can do that.
I think that's like a post, like you get the initial alpha pieces in place for outputting in a machine parsable format. Like if you wanted to, we could probably do that this cycle if you're doing the work.
I would be, but Tim, like that strongly changes based on whether things are versioned. Because if they're versioned, you can just use CLI runtime printers.
Yes, but it's very wise for us to decide now. But then again, because the output is going to be under experimental as a flag, you can technically do whatever you want at the back end until this graduates to -O.
Okay, so do I hear people saying, go ahead and implement some version of this, and then once we before we graduate it, we can revisit. Before we graduate it out of experimental, we can revisit adding the types.
Well, we should decide, because like this is going to affect the implementation pretty
I
heavily.
agree. I mean, that's why in our internal meeting, I said this is actually important.
If I may comment, first of all, I really like the document, and I think that the first point that we have to come up with a good solution is how to get the information flow from the phases toward where we are serializing. That is what you call the coupling command from printing. And this is the first part that in my opinion should be addressed, because it has the huge impact on the code base. If I think, for instance, to upgrade, we have output that comes from different, very layered sequence of calls. So this is because when you are doing machine output, you have to disable the standard text output.
I think that for upgrade, we should punt machine readable output until we get the phases.
That's probably true, but there are phases that are shared between several commands. So this is so. My first point is that a good document, probably the trickiest part is the part of get the information out from the various command. For the topic about version API, in my opinion, we should aim to have a versioned API in the end, but this should be a different API groups under kubeadm.
That's what I said earlier.
Not the same of the config.
Yeah, that's what I noted earlier. That the output schema could be separate from the existing kubeadm schema. It doesn't have to be the same schema or version even.
Yeah, it does. It's probably the right thing to do anyway. But you know, we're going to have multiple APIs in the same application. That's
okay if you have multiple groups. Why don't we do this for right now? We're not going to decide right now. This is going to require some percolation to think about the implications. Why don't folks have a chance to review the KEP as it is, try and give feedback, and maybe by next week we can have a more informed discussion, a more well thought out discussion about the implications and potential approaches. That's what we do with all major things anyways.
So I have a question regarding the KEP as well. Is it in the scope of this KEP to also provide a way, or at least give a hint on how errors are going to be reported or warnings, aside from the optimistic approach of assuming that the operation will work and I just fetch the parts that I care about of the output?
So that's a good point. I was operating under the assumption that the successful output goes to standard out and any errors are going to standard error. So if you're shell execing this, you should be paying attention to both. But and people using Cloud Init can redirect things appropriately. However, there's no reason that the output objects, if we're using whatever the object is, right, couldn't include, basically, instead of calling it raw, just call it standard out and standard error, and having an exit status. So basically the output would include metadata that you might see from a process, exit status, standard out, standard error, but then also the additional data. But again, like, to me, the successful result is when you parse standard out. Otherwise, you're parsing standard error because you got a non-zero exit code. That's how I kind of looked at this. try to keep it simple. And that's generally how I think that process works. But it's not a web application where you're kind of wanting both in one data model, I think, but you could certainly treat it that way if you wanted to. I don't know which is, more right or wrong, or really there's one that's more than the other.
Yeah, I think we need to percolate on it. I really appreciate the thoroughness of the proposal and looping everybody in together. I think to think about the implications is going to take a little bit. I don't, given the time frame and the fact that a bunch of us are going to be out for KubeCon, we'll be out of pocket for a while. I don't know whether or not it'll be possible to get major changes in place for 115.
115.
I do think we could probably get agreement on the KEP for 115, but what we want to do for 116.
What is the deadline for exceptions, if there is one?
Yeah, Kenny already called that out and said that this is past the deadline for accepting new work, but you could file an exception. And I said, hey, we're discussing this morning. I don't know that he put the actual deadline on it. I'm looking at the enhancement exception. It doesn't, that page doesn't have the date, it looks like.
Well, there's a part of me that wants to get other features in place too, to make sure that we can push that into the right pocket. So like getting upgrade phases in place.
My concern, Tim, is any of the CAPI work depending on having this for 115?
I would talk with Jason in particular. I don't think it's hard dependent right now, but I would consult with Jason.
Yeah, they can always update their parse logic on the back end anyway.
Yeah.
So technically, the issue is not a P0 or P1, as far as I know.
I agree. So because it's not a P0 or P1, at least at this time, unless it becomes a blocker for people implementing stuff on the CAP E side, it'd be way easier for people who are consuming or building automation tools around kubeadm, which is a lot of people. So I think we can bring this up. Let's try to rally on the details and get it implementable for 116 for sure. I don't know if I want to rush it for 115.
No, the only way I would be even comfortable including it in 115 would be without versioned output, with no promises about how this is moving forward, and then come to some agreement whether to include or not. And it seems like we're going towards include versioned output for 116. But based on what I just said, the way I said it, if we're not going to conclude some type of promise moving forward, it's really no better than what we have now, because it doesn't just need to be structured, it also needs to have some type of promise of forward compatibility.
Yeah, we're just going to make sure that we don't break the outputs between this version and 116.
Yeah, exactly. Although that's already happening now, and it has happened, which I can use, say that's precedent, but you don't do it on purpose. I'm sure when it happened, it wasn't on purpose. So
yeah, basically the phase refactors caused minor, spaces and bugs like that. But I wanted to also say thank you a lot for writing this. This is very well structured document.
Oh, well, I appreciate. I mean, you gave me a lot of good guidance there. Even though you said I don't know if this should be a CAP. I'm like, you know what? No one got fired for buying IBM Java or writing a CAP. So if we want to discuss it, then let's make it a CAP.
Yeah.
Thanks, and thanks again to Ed, because we had a chat yesterday, and I really appreciate the work he's done on this.
Well, I should thank you, Andrew, for bringing it again. Hopefully, this time it will have more chances to get accepted eventually. But yeah, as for versioning output, I would say, I don't know. I would agree with Andrew. With we should start with smaller scope, because it really requires a lot more work. If we we could aim for it, but for near future, I would say we would be good without it, as it's much better than what we have now, just because of that. That's my opinion.
Well, we have T-minus 4 minutes, and I think it requires some in-depth thought about the implications. So why don't we rally in the CAP if folks can review? It's greatly appreciated. More voices, more ideas, more thoughts, the better. So it's linked in the main doc, or it's linked from, there's a link in the link from the main doc. So maybe we should just link it for an action item for everyone to follow up on. And we can discuss again next week. Does that seem reasonable for folks? I don't know if we're going to get to all the other stuff that's on the rest of the agenda for today, but we can see where we're at. We got 3 minutes. Did you want to pick off the next one, Fabrizio?
Let's try. So I'm spending a lot of time on the certificate reviewer. And basically what I want to add a new command that allows the user to show to be aware about certificate expiration, because every day there is one person that is hit by this problem. So I have one proposal that is to add a new command under alpha certs. The second, I don't know if there will be some better place. I'm also thinking to add, to print a table with certificate expiration in the kubeadm upgrade plan command output.
I think if you had the separate subcommands, that it would be, given this other topic that we just discussed, I don't necessarily know if you would want to put that into the upgrade plan itself. Perhaps we could drop a text breadcrumb to say that, like, if we detect it, you can use this other command.
Okay.
Maybe we can go with the first command at first, kubeadm alpha certs as the primary target for this release, and don't touch the other commands for now.
Yes, the problem is that the alpha commands are less visible than upgrade plan.
Yes, but we also plan to write the document for this cycle.
The documents are always revved every cycle, and it gives us a point of reference for folks to evaluate every time. So every time a person has an issue, you say point to the docs. They should be following the documentation procedure for updates.
Okay. So the first one is yes, the second one is no, and second, there was some comment from Duffy about the fact that renewing the certificates without that are not near expiration is too aggressive. So I'm thinking to renew only if certificates are going to expire, but we have to define what is going to expire.
I would open an issue to discuss that one. We are actually at time. I want to make sure we have to stop because we have collisions with the Zoom account. So that means the CAPI folks are waiting on us currently. So could you open an issue with that particular one and we can discuss it?
Yes, I will open the issue with all the other points.
All right, cool.
Bye-bye, thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.